All right. Holy cow, it's Wednesday. It's hump day. My newsletter actually went off. All this research that says that you should send everything Wednesday at 11 o'clock. Well, I don't know if everyone gets flooded now, at the exact same time, so maybe I should send it a different time, but that's what's happening today. We got another interview for you and excited to share this gentleman with you. I actually got to meet him in the real world. We do similar stuff, which I'm super excited about. He is the owner at Insignia Training Partners, and also he is an ordained dude with one of the best mustaches we've ever seen. Let's bring in the one and only Bernie DeSantis. What's up, Bernie?
Hey, John, thanks for having me. How are you today?
Yeah, good. I'm glad that you could be here. Love the color green on
Thank you.
the shirt. That's actually my geo teaming color that I use over there. So, Bernie, what's happening in your world today? You're in Detroit City, right?
Yeah, based out of Detroit, Michigan. As always, small business owner trying to develop new relationships and new business. So, been spending a lot of time since you and I last saw each other at the conference, speaking to new potential clients and new potential partners, and seeing where we can take this whole virtual thing that you and I are both engaged in.
I know here we become business owners and we think it's all glory and champagne and Cavassier. And really, the truth is, right? We're the people who got to make it happen, get people to sign contracts, like make money flow through their company and do things
Absolutely.
like that. So, speaking of which, Bernie, for my friends who don't know you, tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Bernie DeSantis. I am the owner of Insignia Training Partners, LLC. We're a boutique learning and development organization. Put another way, we're really an agnostic learning and development organization. We don't focus on particular products or industries or service. I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to. I don't really care what the product or services that my clients are working with. From my perspective as a learning and development, expert and provider of services, learning and development happens the same way, generally speaking, unless we're talking about very specialized subject matter. So we're able to really support any type of business from, people in automotive to autopsy and mortuary equipment sales. I've worked with Chewy, the pet food company, and several large healthcare organizations as well. I mean, really run the gamut of all different types of products and services. And those services that we offer are, instructional designers, facilitators, both live and virtual, project managers, learning strategists, and voiceover talent as well, all within that learning and development world. And then more recently with COVID, and in line with what you're doing here, John, is virtual meeting production as well. One of my main clients during that time was Ernst and Young, and we actually developed a team for their internal training program of about 50 producers. And we ended up doing close to 3,000 events over the course of the beginning of COVID until now. I don't know that we provide quite the same level of support that you do. I've seen some of your work, and it's truly amazing. But a lot of our clients are smaller customers as well. They're not necessarily always looking for high production value with green screens and tons of music, but what they are looking for is a great learning environment and experience for their participants. You and I have both been to several Zoom meetings, I'm sure more than we can count, where they weren't that good. And you walked away not feeling like you took away what you should have. And you've also been to meetings, ones that we've produced most, I want to say first of all, but you walked away from meetings where you felt great, you felt engaged, you took away what you were supposed to, you felt like you and the facilitator, maybe you had a group of 100 people, but you felt like you and that facilitator actually connected. And those are the type of learning engagements that we try to provide to our clients. We work with really anyone who is looking to do virtual meetings and webinars. Similar to you, again, I'm sure that you work across a lot of different industries and different types of folks that are online, but we're at a point in history now where so much can be done virtually, right? Whether you're talking about training or you're talking about sales presentations or even just team meetings, they need support. People, unfortunately, even 3 years into a pandemic, still don't know how to run a Zoom meeting and do it well. And even if they do know how to do it, they're oftentimes splitting their focus between running the logistics of that meeting or that training and trying to deliver their content in an engaging and efficient way with their participants. And let's be honest, most times it doesn't work.
Well, let's say hi to C.A. Hurst calling in from, I believe, from California, and a few other people who we have watching with us. Let's dive into that, Bernie. Let's start on the dark side of producing, or the dark side of virtual meetings.
Sure.
Like at least hit your top three. Here, I'll trade with you too. Top worst things in a virtual meeting. Let me see if I can even start. The opening, right? Blank opening, no person, nobody has a camera on, no screen share. I have no idea if I'm in the right place. That's my number one. Your turn.
That is a terrible experience, and I have gone to quite a few meetings that are start out that way. I would add to that, John, the Ben Stein effect, which is, if you've seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you know who I'm talking about. The facilitator is absolutely monotone, does absolutely nothing to engage with his participants, and just lectures and speaks at you.
Which is okay. Now, the War of 1812 is when? Anyone?
Bueller?
Bueller? Anyone? Okay, because the inverse of that one too. My number two, Bernie, is I raise my hand and you've just flat out ignore me.
Mm-hmm.
Flat out ignore me. Like I actually want to. I'm giving it up as the attendee, saying I'll take the risk.
Yep.
I'll want to say something. I want to chat something, and you just like blow me off. I'm out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. What about you? What's number two for Bernie?
I would probably say number two for me is similar to that, in that facilitators don't encourage people to raise their hand or utilize the features of Zoom to participate, whether that is, raising their hand or using the chat or an annotation. They choose not to engage those resources in a meeting when they help 100% to raise engagement and keep people involved in your meeting.
Speaking of which, shout out to Robert Nellums, previous director at the Seattle Center, where 5,000 people every weekend go to see amazing programming, including one we have coming up in May, the API Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Festival, which will actually be the only festival broadcast hybrid, meaning that you can actually see this virtual. I'll be posting links in the upcoming month, so we would actually love for you to engage with that content. Okay, let's see. Number three for me. Number three for me is the dreaded phrase at the beginning of a virtual meeting. Let's just wait a few minutes for the other people to log on. Right? That is definitely in my top three going, why did I bother to show up on time?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm just going to show up late and disrespect my time immensely, which is even more precious. I think online minutes are like more precious now than sometimes real word minutes, right?
Absolutely.
So, anyways,
Absolutely.
that's my number three. What about you, Bernie?
My number three, and I think this actually spans both live and virtual facilitation, is when the facilitator is not familiar with their content and able to speak to it from some level of experience.
You've seen this?
I've seen it a few times. Unfortunately, people like to think that they are subject matter experts in what they do, and many of them are. And they know it well enough that they could be a great presenter, but they lack the presentation skills to actually communicate what they know effectively.
Yeah, who is it? Can you maybe share like either who or what qualities was one of your top presenters in the last 3 years on virtual?
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. I think some of the real winning features or winning skill sets, if you will, are things like being personable, being approachable, being an effective communicator, listening to your participants. Huge. And they are so simple and things that we should be doing every day in every engagement when we talk to people. But when you're leading a classroom of 30, 40, 50, 1,000 people, you need to be aware of what's happening in your classroom and respond to those things that are going on. You can only do that by listening and by paying attention, being engaged.
Totally agree. I think it's, and one of the keys for me is what I call playback, right? Which is to come back to that and that I really listen to the point so that I can come back to here and say, Bernie's really talking about people who listen well. Those kind of things like that is just making sure that the facilitator is hearing the audience, especially if they say something or if they chat something, right? And so
Absolutely.
just acknowledging that is another step to somebody feel like they're being included, they're being engaged because they made a comment, and again, it's being included in the content.
Absolutely.
All right, Bernie. So let's go on the plus side now. We can go to the light side of virtual meetings. What has to happen, all right, for Bernie DeSantis to be engaged in a virtual meeting, especially in 2023? That's what I want to know.
I
2023.
mean, 2023, we've seen a lot over the last couple of years. And again, being a virtual producer, I've had the opportunity to work on some really great productions and some great meetings and trainings. For me as a learner, number one is to have an engaging facilitator that understands the tool that they're using, right? Because it's not all about the content that's coming out of their mouth. Sometimes you need to leverage those tools that you have available to you, be it a polling question or the breakout rooms, or again, those annotation tools. They are so valuable for keeping people involved in the meeting. So when I show up to a meeting and they're not using those tools within the first few minutes, I'm almost immediately tuned out because I'm now trained to expect those things from a good meeting.
Yeah, that's great. And again, don't you get that? I mean, right? We've been in business for a long time. Don't you snap judge some things?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think virtual meetings is another thing now, especially anybody can do it now after 3 years, right? If certain things don't happen in those first few minutes, I think it'll
Especially
send
now.
you on two paths, right? The path like, I'm really interested in what this person has. This is amazing. And this path going, I'm going to read a lot of email.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I had a friend who had that too. He had a sales meeting, and everybody he complained. Everybody was multitasking. I'm curious, what would you do with that, Bernie? I'll tell you what I did in a little bit, but I'm curious, like if a client came to you and says, "My number one challenge is everybody's multitasking during the meeting." I'm kind of curious to see what would you come back with, or what
I
would you?
mean, my first question to that client would be, what are you doing to engage them, to keep them interested in your meeting? Because if they are finding value and spending the time they should be listening to your training
Yeah.
in their email, they clearly find their email more important than whatever it is you're saying.
And they're salespeople, right? Like, maybe the email is actually good for the company in some ways, right? If you're selling more, I'm not going to complain too much, but
Oh,
but if you are going to have a meeting of salespeople, my number one piece of advice right there, Bernie, seems pretty counterculture, which was stop the meeting, just stop it, just like end it, like you
waste of
almost
time.
should abruptly end it and not tell anybody why,
Mhm.
because nobody's going to notice. They'll probably be
Nope.
happy. And then I said, go back, redesign the meeting, and then do things like make it shorter, make it something, whatever it is, though, right? Do what Bernie said. Make it so that something is during that time is helping them, which in this case should be helping them to sell, right?
Right.
And that if they're not tuned in, right, they're missing out. There should be some FOMO,
Absolutely.
right? There should definitely be.
Absolutely.
I would love to hear from your side too. I'm starting to really look at it, right? Return to in person. I'm looking at a lot of the data. I'm trying to watch and keep tabs. Again, I actually had a really good January, but I feel like in February or March it slowed down a little bit. So I'm kind of curious if you're seeing the same thing, because in this rush back to in person, right? I think I knew there was always going to be a backlash to, there's going to be less virtual because there's going to be less people online. But I'd be curious to see what you're seeing now, and of course, what you think is going to happen in the near future.
Great question. Yeah. I've started to notice that a lot of the virtual stuff is starting to go back to live and in person, because many companies are requiring their staff and workforce to start coming back to the office with some regularity. So I think that there's going to be a larger influx of hybrid, because there's still a lot of companies and individuals, for that matter, that aren't requiring and don't want to go back to an office, and will frankly quit their jobs if they're required to. So I don't see virtual at this point going away, because we've proven way too much value in it, right? We're not sending 100 salespeople to Vegas once a year, or once a month in some cases, or whatever, to these events, which I'm sure they miss. But as an organization, you don't want to spend all that money on traveling and on hotels and on per diem and all that stuff, when you can have your participants, your salespeople, log into a live virtual meeting with no travel time. You don't have to provide meals. You don't have to pay for a hotel stay, and you get at least the same level of communication, right? Maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily the same level of engagement, all the time or the same way, but you're still getting the same level of information if presented properly. So the value of virtual and online training classes is not going to go away anytime soon because of the cost savings associated with it. Will people go back into the office? Yeah, absolutely. Is there going to be more live stuff again? Yeah, absolutely. Because you can really connect with people in a different way in a live environment. But the value of virtual, it's there, and it's going to be long lasting, right? Because over the course of 3 years, the world still continued to turn and we still continue to do business. And this was the way that we did it.
Yeah. Yes. I think you're right on there, Bernie, because I think we're seeing that. I want to give a shout out to Tamara too, who's watching on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. Which is that I think there was a big bump from COVID, right? Like the world had to do this, and now we're starting to see this other slope, which is like, okay, right now the world's returning, and now there's this inflection point. And by the way, every piece of technology is like this. Like cell phones, we're like, I'm so excited, and then you get to this point, and like this thing is a brick, right? There's not like it's a luggable. The early cell phones, right? Like I think I'm getting brain cancer, and so people dropped off, and now if the technology is right, it will continue. And like now, right, there are more cell phones than computers.
Yeah.
Right. And the power in your hand in a cell phone is like thousands of times more powerful than computers in the past. And again, phones have really changed, I think, the way that we work. So there's that path, and then there's the other path of like VHS tapes, right? Which is like
become obsolete.
Well, they came back at some point, right? They had a bunch of waves, and then like streaming killed it, and so things like that. I think that. I do think that there'll be a resurgence. So here's my best piece, Bernie, that I had. I spoke at the Northwest Event Show here in Seattle, and it was in person. And I'm just like, how many of you are loving this in person, hug fest, return, reunion? And everyone was like, rah, they're so excited, la. And then I go like, how many of you were on a virtual meeting in the last week? 100%, 100%, Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, like if you and I were to work in person, we would probably still meet virtual leading up to that in-person event, right? Until such a time that we needed to do so. And it's cutting out traffic. I think you and I were just talking about clocking 12 to 14 meetings a day. I couldn't do that in an in-person meeting.
No.
My other one was I had to drive somewhere in Seattle. It's normally 17 minutes. It took me an hour and 20 because I left at 4 p.m. And it's like the hour and 3 minutes I'm never going to get back in my life. And literally, if somebody had a phone and walked me through this venue, I would have been able to achieve the same thing.
Yeah.
So the value is there. But the problem here, Bernie, for me, I'd love to hear your comments on this. The problem for me is that this value has always been there. What I mean by that is before March of 2020, all of this technology was working and for the most part possible, right? Except that only 3 or 4% of us were actually using it on a regular basis.
Right.
And so I'm curious that because the potentiality isn't enough to make it last forever. I'm just curious, do you think like, is the rest of the value going to pipe in? Because I mean, other things too, like I'm looking to do this other trip. The cost of travel and expenses, that flight, that hotel, that food is like 2 to 4 times, if not more expensive.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I'm curious to see what your opinion is on the even though it's all around us, is there enough value for virtual to continue on?
So I believe that there is, and for all of the reasons that you just said, early in the process, pre-COVID, like you said, maybe 3 to 5% of people were actually utilizing this tool in the way that we're utilizing it now. But I think of that as the have to effect, right? People didn't because they didn't have to. But then they did. And once they did, that's when it shined. And I think that there's going to be a certain percentage of people that are old school and prefer to go back and do it the way that they did before. But there's far too many people now that are used to doing it this way and frankly prefer to do it this way, that it's never going to go away. And I think it's going to continue to improve. Right. Zoom is constantly, we talked about earlier, Zoom is updating almost daily the features that they put out, if not weekly, constant. And they are trying to improve for the needs of us, the users. Right. And then you talk about other softwares that are being implemented and introduced. You've got Teams, you've got Adobe Connect, who I know was one of your sponsors at the Training Magazine conference. Right. There's there's so many of these platforms, big and small, that are still being launched today when people are saying, oh, virtual is going to go away now that we can go back into the office. It's not. We're not the only ones who see value in this, John. A lot of people do out there, and they're going to continue to do it, even if right now the shiny new thing again is going back to live. Right. One thing that I like to talk about in with my business overall learning and development, it's a really long sales cycle in a lot of cases, right? You have an idea in some cases from a client, and it may take 6 months or a year or even 2 years to come to fruition, right? To actually launch it and roll it out. And I look at really the overall virtual landscape the same way. We had an opportunity to utilize this product over a couple of years and see the value of it. It's taken a little bit of a lull, but now it may take a little bit of time to ramp back up, right? Mm-hmm. All these new features, some of these new players coming into the game, showing us some new tools, different ways to use it. We're going to have to get a little bit creative again, right? To continue to show the value in it. But when you're talking about it as a base level, again, just the finances of not having to send folks across the country for a training seminar, I don't know any CFO who's going to say, no, let's put everybody on a plane and spend thousands and thousands of dollars to do this.
That's really the key. That's what, about a year or two ago, I bet the same way. Because this time enough people got to experience it to understand the dollar savings. I mean, like, let's just take 100 people flying, right? It's probably almost $2,000 a piece now to get them there, feed them, pay all the per diems, all the expenses, right? $2,000 times 100, right? That's a lot of money when you could take a fraction of that, right? Nobody has to leave home. In fact, and most of them didn't want to leave home anyways. They'd rather be home with their family, or like some other things like that, right? Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Eat their own food, right? Sit in their own pajamas, whatever it is, and still get the educational value if that's what the deal was, right? Now, there's some other things with there, but I'm with that. And I do believe that, I think actually the recession might be the next best thing for virtual, because the recession, for some Fortune 100 companies already, right? If you're watching all the layoffs right now, that's actually a good indicator for virtual, because that means they canceled a bunch of in-person events, right? So even though they took cancellation fees, they saved way more millions of dollars by not doing it, and then turned the whole thing virtual. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that a lot of people aren't talking about, but I do know it's happening.
Absolutely
it's happening.
happening.
Okay. So let's go to continue back to the other side here, Bernie, which is what is some of the best stuff that you've seen, whether it's yours or somebody else? So what I mean by is like, right, like we had a 1,200 person conference, and it was the only conference in the training industry that was 100% live. And I love what my good friend Bob Pike. Oh, by the way, who asked me, he's going to put a new book out. He asked me to write a little review or a little quip for it. Nice. But Bob Pike had the best quote, and he said, holding 100% right live virtual conference is a huge risk, comma. He goes, unless you have the right team. Mm-hmm. And we had the right team for this conference, and it really worked out. Every single person, from the trainers to the producers to the many ambassadors, which were people like who weren't speaking, but they came in and said, we just want to make it a great experience for everyone, really made a difference. So I'm kind of curious, Bernie, what are some of your best success stories over the last 3 years?
That's a really great question, John. The events that I really like to work with, be it, from the facilitation side or the virtual producing side, are the type of events where people personally are able to take something from it, whether it's, personal development type courses, leadership development type courses, professional development type courses. One of my clients I work with in particular, her name is Andrea Howe. She's an author. She wrote a book called the Trusted Advisor Field Book. It's actually the third book in a series called The Trusted Advisor. So I've been working with her on a program called the Get Real Project, along with the Trusted Advisor program. And what they do is they work with a lot of different corporate clients to help consultants and salespeople become better salespeople, right? They become more attuned to the conversation and the needs of their clients. And so when I go and I produce for these type of sessions where you can physically see the ahas, that's the one. So you can physically see the aha moments that these folks have. But working with a professional like Andrea, who does dozens of these type of events a week and really focuses in on the engagement, right? The person actually taking from that training session what it is that they're supposed to, and utilizing all of the tools that are available to them, not just using them, but using them in the right way. And seeing people stick around for 20 or 30 minutes after a session saying, thank you.
There.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
got something today that I can take with me and make my life better, or make my job better or easier, or have a better conversation with my kids. That is so fulfilling. I mean, do I get paid to do this stuff? God, yeah, absolutely. I have bills to pay like everybody else. But if I can go to these sessions and get paid, but also learn something and get fulfillment from it,
True.
that's a win, man. That is a huge win.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Rachel Martinez watching on Facebook Live. Thank you so much. So, I love that when you get speakers like that, well, one of those pieces there too, if you're a producer, right, or if you're planning a virtual program, right, plan for 30 minutes before and after the program, minimum, and more
Minimum.
depending on the type of program, right? The 30 minutes before is log in early, like you and everybody who's speaking or whatever, who's important, let them in early and get all your stuff set, right? Make sure it all works. All right. And then the other part is if you're done early, let people in early, because some people will log in early because they don't want to be late. And then reward the heck out of them, which is like talk to them, right? Just have a one-on-one conversation, right, with them. But the last part too, Bernie, is I did look for what do we cross over in the real world to the virtual world, and one of them is the line, right? Like if we go to a big conference and a big keynoter does something great, at the end of the keynote, right, is a line of some other people that either want to say thanks or they want to ask a question they didn't want to ask, with a gigantic audience,
Right.
and or they wanted to meet them. And I think that in virtual, that you should leave that open, which is like, now's the time to log off. I give an invitation, which is like, you just know clearly, this is the end of the structured program. But if you choose to stay, right, the speaker, right, is also going to stay here with you. Here's a good one. Remember 5 Dysfunctions of a Team?
Yeah.
Yeah, Patrick Lencioni sold 6 million books, and I got a chance to be his producer. And I'll give props to Patrick Lencioni. We both have the same publisher, Wiley. And in that, he's got it. And what I mean, he still has it on virtual. Because some speakers didn't cross over so well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's one who did. And here's how I knew. I was producing one, and that's every single person is a business owner in this meeting. And there was a musical thing that said, okay, we ended, so here we're going to start this musical thing. We had a musical performance. And I said, oh, by the way, Patrick Lencioni said he'll be in the speaker's room, right? And if you want, you can opt to go there and hang out. He said he would hang out for a few more minutes, right? Half of the audience went. And I moved breakout rooms to go watch. And he was like on fire. He was, when you get on a roll as a speaker.
Yeah.
He was on it, and the audience was like bringing it in. And so that's at least the value of great speakers. When you get the right speaker for a program, you should choose carefully, because I think it makes or breaks your program. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's something to be said about somebody who understands how to facilitate in this type of environment. But that aside, having someone who's passionate about delivering and what they do and can communicate that passion, it makes all the difference in the world. Like I said, I've worked with some subject matter experts that are just absolutely dry as hell. They're really smart. They're really good at what they do, but they can't present their way out of a paper bag, unfortunately. And that makes for a not so great training, right?
Yes.
So aligning yourself with great facilitators who are passionate about what they're doing makes all the difference in the world. If you have a passionate facilitator, you can have bad content and still put on a good training. But you can have great content and a poor facilitator, and it's going nowhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely, quite often now I will follow speakers and not content. Because, at least like if I'm at a conference, especially if I had like 2 bad sessions, I'm like, okay, I'll go to the one I know. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Even if it's the same content I've heard before, I'll actually go, because they're so good that I'll get something new from it when they present it to a different audience.
Yep.
And that's another piece that I think is really important. Let's go to the production side though, Bernie. what are some of the best or higher tech things that you've seen on virtual? So, for instance, let's see, what's the high point and the low point? My low point was I tried to get into I think it was the Foo Fighters concert on VR after the Super Bowl, and I stood in a virtual line and then never got in.
Oh gosh.
And then it turned out the only way I could get in was to watch it on Facebook Live on my computer and not my VR headset. But I was kind of like trying this VR thing to try and say, what's this new world like? And
Right.
let me just say, it's not ready, right? At least in that instance. But what's on the high side? The high side is my very good friend's Daybreaker. Such a fan of Radha Agarwal and her Daybreaker. They have she loves dance parties but didn't like the drug and alcohol scene. So she created a morning dance party. And so she's created a huge community around it. And they used to do all these in-person events in like all these epic, beautiful places. Of course, COVID hit and they went virtual. They were some of the craftiest people I've ever seen on virtual. In fact, they're my inspiration for webinars. If I get forced to present on a webinar, right, I'd rather go to meeting. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it. But I said, can I admit everybody? They admitted, like they had a 5,000 person webinar.
Mm-hmm.
But if you raised your hand, they would start admitting, and they admitted up to like 300 people to be on video with them. And they actually, part of them became the background.
Oh, wow.
And
That's fun.
so, yeah, so that's some crafty stuff like that. I'm just curious, what are some of the crafty things that you've seen in the last couple of years?
I wish that I could say I've seen some really creative things. A lot of my my events are, I certainly won't say boring, but they're really more around the learning engagement piece, right? There's a very specific purpose to that meeting. But I've absolutely seen a lot of my clients utilize some of the different applications that can be added into Zoom, right? Like Menti polls. I mean, sure, Zoom has their own poll function, but integrating a Menti poll allows people to do it from their phones, and they can scan things, and it gives them a little bit more flexibility to do things like that. I think integration of other tools within the production that are relevant to the production and to that training content are really helpful, because again, it's just one more thing that attendee or participant has to do to stay involved in the training session. So I'm a big fan of adding in those applications and other technologies. I will admit that I don't get to do it nearly as often as I think you do, and I would like to do.
All right, let's see. We're going to do something on the fly I didn't plan, right? Let's see if we can actually do this. So here we go. If Zoom will cooperate with me. Okay, great. I've got Mentimeter here. All right. Let's see. I'm going to put it in full screen. Give me a question, like something that can be answered in 1 to 3 words.
What is your favorite model of car?
Ooh, what is your favorite model of car? Okay, good. So now if you can see this, and let me put it in presentation mode. So this is, for those who've never seen, right, Mentimeter, right, this is what it looks like. And so if you actually went to menti.com, so here, let's see, Bernie and I will try and go here. And you put in this code number at the top. You can also get a QR code for it. I didn't put it on here, but I have done that before.
Yep.
Menti.com. I got a code number. My code number is 41339035. And I bet, no brainer, you know what model of car that I like.
I most certainly do, sir.
Okay, go. Let's see if I. Whoa, there's my. Okay, do you have one? I see.
I most certainly do.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is from Detroit. Cadillac, yes. All right, I'm going to leave this running for you all. So if you do see this, go ahead and put this in here. Maybe later on social media, I'll post the part here. But this is what Mentimeter is doing, is by making this interactive, right? And this is actually one of the few ways to do it in a live stream, because you got to use a tool outside of what's going on. But again, if you saw this, went to meti.com and hit the code 41339035. Here, actually, let me spotlight myself for a second. And then you put it in here and then type in a word and hit enter. And now the best part, though, is like you saw here, is like these words come in, right? And you can participate in something. And so as a speaker, I can get a lot of feedback and a lot of engagement from the audience in a short amount of time. So yeah, Mentimeter and other tools were things that I was writing about already in our digital team building games. Like I was really a fan of shoot, what's the text message one? Poll Everywhere.
That's it. Yeah, pull everywhere.
So Poll Everywhere, and I thought that texting was really a good version of it. The reason why is because I tried some other ones, like one was Twitter based. The number of people on Twitter was not high, right? But the number of people on text is like almost 100%, right?
Mhm.
And so if you have like text, I would give a guide, say, make a text to this 6-digit number and then write your response. And then my screen, my PowerPoint slide would blow up and people, they thought it was magic, right? It is just technology, but it looks like magic as engagement.
Yeah.
So speaking of magic, Bernie, let's talk about the future. What from Bernie's chair and Insignia's chair do you see in the future? What wishes do you have for the future of virtual?
Um, I see the future of virtual as being very bright. Quite frankly, I again don't think that it's going away. Um, I see it becoming more engaging. I think that we're going to have more tools to be able to continue to engage people so that you can use more of a variety. The fact is, if you go to 10 Zoom meetings, in those 10 Zoom meetings, you can probably cover every single feature at least once in all of those meetings. And so if you've gone to 10, you get to a point where, okay, I've seen the polls, I've seen the breakout rooms, I've seen annotations, I've used all the functionality. It's cool, it still keeps me engaged, but it's not as exciting. It's not magical, right? So I foresee there continue to be more features added. I foresee more applications being developed outside of Zoom that are applicable to Zoom or Teams or whatever the platform is that we're going to use. And I think it's going to continue to rise as far as usage. Again, we're at a point where people are able to start going back to the office and do these things live. But who's to say that 6 months or a year from now, we're not locked down again? It could happen, right? And now we
Yep.
have a proven tool and resource that we can pivot to or continue to use in a lot of cases that we know works.
We're
I see.
one mutation away from another lockdown, Bernie, and we're just
Absolutely.
like I feel like we're lucky, and every day right now still is a little unpredictable. While we start to gain our security, like we can go back to being this way, it's still rapidly changing.
Oh yeah, that could all change tomorrow. I mean, there's still some countries in the world that have varying levels of lockdown, even today. Even
Yes,
today.
yeah, and so yeah, I do think there are a lot of things uh, that change. So you know what? Maybe that is the future of virtual, which is, well, one is find the strategic use of it every day. And number two is you better keep doing it because like if is another situation or whatever, right? It's one of the best plan Bs we've ever had. And now actually people are trained on it. Before it was like, oh my gosh, what is this thing? But now like not pretty a very high percentage. That's one of the things that I have seen. For instance, by like here was a great example on our program. We had interviewing people, and I could have done something more higher tech in production,
Mhm.
but it requires them using a link to get on, and then it's another system, right? And then their cameras and their mics are set wrong, and blah blah blah. In the end, like this client decided, let's just go back and produce it in Zoom. He goes, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of quality for ease of like the speakers. Like we spent a lot less time in rehearsals with them. They knew to just show up as long as they were there 20 minutes before they went on. Right? They didn't get a phone call going, "Where are you, Bernie?" Right?
Right.
So
No,
I think that's a good piece.
and to circle back to something you said earlier, John, I think you were hit the nail right on the head. One of the most important things that folks need to do with virtual is have that 30 minutes to even an hour before their event to do that tech check or production meeting or whatever you want to call it. It's so imperative. I mean, I've had so many clients, unfortunately, that will show up 5 minutes before the events to start. And they're all discombobulated because they didn't have their camera set up right. They didn't have their microphone set up right. They didn't have their presentation set up properly. And they're using multiple monitors and now trying to share and figure out which, and it gets really hectic and crazy. So I have to echo that. You absolutely have to take the time to prepare. Because if you don't, as the old saying goes, if you don't take the time to prepare, you should prepare to fail. Right?
I think that, you know what, and if you don't do it for yourself, because look, you're the speaker, right? You want to look good. If you're the speaker and you want to look good, you show up early. But if you don't do it for yourself, do it for your attendees. Because
Right.
there's nothing worse than like opening doors, right? Everyone's there and you're fumbling with a mic and you still got a slide deck that's like you're editing and
Mhm.
right. You don't want to show anybody that. Like it's do it for the audience, right? Do it for the audience. Okay. So Bernie, if people to remember one thing from this interview with you, what's the one thing that you want people to remember?
Gosh, I would probably say the one thing that I'd want people to remember is that we can support any learning and development need for Insignia Training Partners for any client, right? Whether that is your facilitation needs, your design needs, your strategy needs. If there is an end learner somewhere in that need, my company is able to help, and then you should reach out to us.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Bernie. Which goes to one of my core principles in my book, right? Never lead a virtual meeting alone. If you're mainly on Zoom, we love to shorten it to never Zoom alone, right?
Amen, sir.
Amen. Where can people find you, Bernie?
Best way to locate me right now is on LinkedIn. Bad3 is my initial, so if you search that, you'll find me. We are in the process of revamping our website right now. We'll be rolling that out in a couple of weeks. If you want to look at the old version, we're at insigniatraining.com.
Insigniatraining.com or linkedin.com/IN/BADIII,
Right.
which Bernie is one of the thirds, right? There are two Bernies before you, right?
That's correct. Yes,
Oh
sir.
my gosh. And then, oh, actually, your closing comment, right? You are an ordained dude. How did you become an ordained dude?
Well, admittedly, one of my favorite movies of all time is The Big Lebowski. If you've seen
Yes.
it, you know it's an absolutely absurd movie.
Yeah.
But quite a few people have taken some of the dude's principles and created a quote unquote religion around it. We're not a religious group in any way, but it's really more of a philosophy on approaching your life and your day. And when you look at some of the more unique things that the dude says throughout the movie, you can almost turn them into, what would Jesus say kind of things, which,
Dudism.
it makes it fun, but also still very relevant to life. Being a dude is really about taking it easy and, taking life as it comes and adjusting to the scenarios that are presented to you on a daily basis.
Well, I'll share this too. I don't know if you heard it. Before the pandemic hit, there was a phenomenon happening in Hollywood where they would play The Big Lebowski and they had all the original cast members. They would play the movie behind them, but they would read the script live.
It's
And it
fantastic.
sold out,
Yes.
right? And that's the other piece here too. How do we get like The Big Lebowski in the end is just video, right? And how do we get video that becomes iconic, that becomes a cult classic, almost in the way that it creates ordained dudes? Think about your next virtual and saying, can we elevate to that level? Bernie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, John, for having me.
All right. So we've been talking with Bernie DeSantis. I hope you enjoyed that, especially for meeting an ordained dude, as well as the core critical pieces of never Zoom alone, right? Look for great producers, right? Myself, Bernie, others, depending upon what you're trying to do. Don't do it alone. Do it with a great team, and you'll find that the end result will be much better than if it's one person doing it themselves. All right, my name is John Chen, the author of Engaging Virtual Meetings, and we'll see you next time here on Engaging Virtual Meetings interviews. See you.
Don't we start people and keep old people? Show you got heart.